Hey everyone, it's Bill here again. It's actually been a few weeks since I posted anything on the channel. That's because I've been working on some other musical projects which are pretty interesting and pretty exciting and which hopefully I'll be able to tell you about soon. I thought I'd zip back today though and give you a bit of an improvisation exercise because I know that loads of you guys love these improv exercises when I post them. It's kind of the usual drill. We've got a 16-bar chord progression and what I'm going to do is improvise through it a couple of times in a kind of pop piano, ballad piano kind of style, and then talk about what I was doing and give you some tips about how you can take the progression for yourselves and use it to develop your improvisation skills. Here's the progression we're going to work on. It's 16 bars long and it's actually quite an interesting one. I set myself a bit of a challenge here. Could I create a progression that worked entirely in one mode? So it's not in a major key, it's not in a minor key, it's in what we call D Dorian mode. Now if you don't know what modes are, don't worry about that because I will explain the theory in a few minutes, but for now just bear that in mind as we play and listen to the kind of distinctive sound that this progression is creating. So let's have a look at how this chord progression actually works. Let's try to understand some of the music theory behind it. As I said, it's 16 bars long and it's in D Dorian, which we'll come to in a second. But let me just play through some of the chords that you can see in the progression there in case you're not familiar with some of them. Bar 1, D minor, straightforward. Okay. Bar 2, G9. There's G7 and G9 just adds the A to the G7 chord, okay, and sometimes I was playing it in different voicings and inversions, so it was cropping up and things like that. Sometimes notes were missed out and so on, but very roughly a G9. C add 9. Okay, so there is our C add 9 chord. You can drop the E in if you want. If I wanted you to miss the E out altogether every time, I would have called it C sus2, but I'm calling it C add 9. Yeah, that's different from a C9 chord because I'm not including any sort of seventh there. Okay, so it's a regular C chord plus a D, and with or without the third, doesn't really matter. A minor 7 in bar 4. Then in bar 5 is D minor 7. Again, I was kind of chopping and changing around between D minor and D minor 7. It doesn't really matter which one you use. You know, choose the particular chord to suit the feeling you've got going on. Then B minor 7 with a flat fifth is just that. Okay, you could call it B half diminished seventh. I don't like that terminology, which is something I've mentioned in the past, so I do call it B minor 7 flat 5. Then we have in bar 7 C major 7, and in bar 8 E minor sus, which is an E minor chord but with the A instead of the G, and because it's a sus4 chord we do not play the third note, we just play E, A and B. Okay, again, doesn't matter if you do drop the third in, but that's the sound I was generally trying to chase right there. Then in bars 9, 10, 11 and 12, they're pretty much the same as bars 1 to 4, except in bar 11 we've got that solitary B diminished chord that crops up for a couple of beats, and then towards the end everything is pretty much as we've seen, except in the last 2 bars we've got A minor sus4, which is just that. Again, 3 notes, it's like an A minor chord, but instead of the C in the middle, we are playing a D. Now, as I said, this isn't in a major or a minor key, although it has flavours of both at times. Instead, we're in D Dorian, which is a mode, and it's been quite an effort to keep the whole progression in something that can be called Dorian mode, but we'll talk about why in a second. In case you don't know what modes are, let's just have a quick run through the theory there. Most songs that you will be familiar with will either be in a major key or a minor key. So if a song is in, for example, C major, then most or all of its notes will be taken from the C major scale, and most or all of its chords will be taken from what we call the diatonic chords of C major, the chords that kind of grow naturally out of that C major scale. Likewise, if it's in C minor, then most of the notes and chords will be taken from that scale, the C natural minor scale, with occasional diversions into the C harmonic minor scale, which is exactly the same except it has a B natural rather than a B flat. Now, a mode is just a different type of scale, okay? So the Dorian mode is exactly the same as the regular natural minor scale, except instead of having that minor 6 in the scale, it has a major 6. So there is C natural minor, and there is C Dorian. Now, D Dorian is a really easy one to play in because of the way the notes fall. It's just all the white notes between D and D. Yeah, so it's like you're playing in C, but things are starting and finishing on Ds. Okay, so that is D Dorian. Now, keeping everything modal all the time is tricky, yeah, because Dorian mode, like any major or minor scale, also has its own set of chords. It's not quite strictly accurate to call them diatonic chords, but let's do that anyway. And you can grow particular chords out of that D Dorian scale, okay? D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, B diminished, C, and back to D. And you might recognise some of those chords from the progression that we were playing. Now, the difficulty you have if you try to create a progression entirely using those chords is that it will try to resolve out to a major or minor. So every time we're hitting a G, okay, your ear would take you very, very easily to a C chord. So there are various points in this progression where you could just land on a C chord and you would have a sense of being finished, okay? We would have resolved into the major. So it was quite an effort actually to write a progression that stayed convincingly D Dorian throughout. And one of the problems of that scale is that it doesn't give us an easy dominant chord. So if we're in the scale of C major, then we have the number 5 chord, G or G7, which is a natural dominant chord, a natural resolve back to the C. In D Dorian, we don't have a chord that naturally resolves easily back to the D minor. That's why I used A minor sus, which does a reasonable job of it. It's a good approximation of a dominant effect chord. Strictly speaking, you could call it the dominant chord in D because it's based D Dorian because it's based on the 5th degree of the scale. Exactly why it has a strongish dominant effect we could spend hours discussing, but pretty much it's because it shares a couple of notes with that D minor chord, but also has that kind of 5 chord character as well, which helps us to resolve to the D minor. Try not to get yourself in a situation where the progression suddenly decides it really, really wants to resolve out to C major or to A minor, the relative minor. And in particular, you need to be careful on the G7 chords or the G9 chords when they crop up. Because if you get something like that, okay, in bar 2, suddenly your ear really wants to take you up to the C. So just watch out for that. Just be aware that sometimes you'll need to pull away, especially if you've got that note B, the leading tone in the C major scale. Just need to avoid that. And one thing you could try doing is just avoid having that B, that leading tone in C, at the top of any of the G chords when they appear, okay? Same for the B diminished chord, which also has a dominant effect, a resolving effect in the key of C major. Just be a little bit careful with that. So if you're playing around with this for yourself, how should you get started? The first thing to do, especially if you're relatively new to improvisation, is just to get those chords under your fingers. Play through the progression a load of times. playing the chords in different shapes, in different inversions, in different invoicings, just getting a feel for them. Beyond that, you can kind of play around to your heart's content. If you're new to improvisation or new-ish to improvisation, then this kind of pop piano style is a really great way of kind of getting into it. And there are various things you can do just to begin to find your feet, begin to find some freedom on the keyboard. A really obvious one is just to use broken chords. So all I'm doing there is playing through the chord progression but breaking up the chords. Now I'm doing it in quite a regular way there, but if you look back again at what I did in my improvisation, we will go through it in detail in a second, you'll see that I was using broken chords quite a lot. It's just that I wasn't just playing one note at a time, and my breaking up of the chords wasn't as predictable, just as cycling through them up and down like that, okay? But if you're just starting out, maybe just have a go at playing the chords in those broken ways in the right hand, or just with a single note bass line in the left. That's one way you could get started. Another thing you can do is play around with suspensions on the chord above and beyond those suspensions that are actually written into the progression. You know, the susses and the ninths and the stuff like that. So for example, if you have a D minor chord, then you can do things like this. Okay, so I'm playing around with the note above and the notes above and below the third of the chord. Okay, typical suspension positions, and they can give you just little bits of melody to drop in, and again you can just play around with those. So all I'm doing there again is just playing the regular chords but mucking about with the suspensions. So do have a go with that. In the left hand, once you get beyond simple one note left hands, which are, as I say, I would advise that's where you start, but you can play around with arpeggios. Okay, so breaking up your chords in different ways, nothing like as complicated as what I was doing there. I was kind of exaggerating, but again, I was doing that. And as you get more fluent, what you should aim for is that kind of distinctive pop piano effect where the two hands are playing off each other. So there, I always struggle to describe it, but you've kind of got that characteristic rocking motion that's creating tension between the left and the right hand. So here we are back at the top of the improvisation. I just want to spend 5 minutes or so running through it and just pulling out one or two of the things that I was doing. Let's start just by looking at the very first two bars, the first two measures. Here we go. So we got the D minor chord and then the G9 chord. Yeah, let's just watch that again. First of all, look at how I create the rhythm to start with. A little bit of rhythm at the start is important because it establishes that forward pulse, okay? Because we don't have a rhythm section or anything behind us. Yeah, it's just broken chords in each hand. Broken chord in the left followed by a broken chord in the right, and that's all it takes. Very, very simple and straightforward. Yeah, listen to that again. And that's where we're transitioning to the G9 chord. Now, an important point here, look at how I do that. Very often when I'm talking about this kind of style, pop piano, ballad piano, call it what you want, I talk about how often you can do more with less. You can create interesting effects by actually moving your hands less than you think. And this is a lovely example of that, because if you look at how I play that G9, there's the D minor, and there's G9. And look, my right hand hasn't moved. It's still playing that D minor shape. But the left hand has gone to this G and the F, kind of a shell chord shape there, kind of thing we might borrow from jazz. And that's created a chord that contains the notes G, D, F, and A. Okay, a G9 chord, barring the B. Yeah, it still has its identity quite comfortably as a G9 chord. We've just missed out the B in that instance. Okay, so I haven't actually moved my right hand, I've changed the chord by changing the left hand. So again, it's very much about you know, not worrying about, right, I've done this bar, change, I've done this bar, change, I've done this bar, change. You don't have to be moving your hands all the time. In a good, well put together chord progression, you shouldn't actually have to move your hands too much all the time to create interesting sounds. Okay, let's move on. There is that C add 9 going to the A minor 7. Now look what I did with the C add 9 there. I resolved it straight up to a straightforward C chord using this very kind of classic pop piano kind of trick of playing the C chord with the D, resolving up to the E. There you go. It's a real cliche of this kind of style, but very, very handy thing to do. To the A minor. Something I should say about the whole progression is that in writing out the progression for you, and remember you can download the, if I haven't said so already, you can download the PDF using the link in the description text underneath the video. In writing out the progression for you, I've given you a flavour of what I was doing, okay? You don't need to stick to those chords absolutely slavishly, and certainly I don't, because as you begin to improvise, as you begin to play around, things will change. So the G add 9 might become a C add 9 might become a C sus, or a regular C chord, or a C major 7, or something like that. And as you work through the progression yourself, focus more on the improvisation than sticking really slavishly to the exact chords that I've written. Sure, in that bar you need some kind of C chord really here. I mean, maybe you could, you know, drop in an A minor or something. Probably wouldn't really work. But don't feel you need to stick to my extensions absolutely religiously. Let's move on. Okay, nice bit of rhythm there, a little bit of broken chord in the right, a little bit of rhythm in the left. So much of this style of piano playing is about the relationship between the two hands, okay, and the way they play off one another. Here we go. And that little movement there is a lovely example of it, yeah? I'm not doing very much, okay? I was just creating a bit of interest on the D minor chord by going up to the G there, creating a bit of a suspension. Let's go back a bit sooner, here we go. There. A very, very kind of faint movement in the left. Yeah? That B minor 7 flat 5 chord, you might quite reasonably say, well, that's nearly the same as a G9 chord, and it is nearly the same as G9 chord, and in that position you could have played a G9 chord, and where we had the G9 earlier you could have played a B minor 7 flat 5. I was just trying to give you a flavour again of what I was doing. Where I've put B minor 7 flat 5, it tends to be where I think it works better without that grounding of the G in the bass. Okay, where everything feels a little bit more, it gives it a more kind of provisional and more contingent kind of feel, but play around with it yourself by all means. Here we go. Yeah, we had that E minor sus chord there. Let's just hear that again, because I want to talk about chord terminology. There it is. E minor sus, E, A, B. If you know a bit about chords, you're probably saying, Bill, why on earth are you calling it E minor sus? Surely it's just an E sus chord. And strictly speaking, you're right, because in a sus chord, the third comes out. The note that gives a chord its identity, major or minor, comes out and is replaced by the fourth, if it's a sus 4, as most sus chords are. And so it doesn't really make sense to think of it as a major sus chord or a minor sus chord. The reason I call it E minor sus, and the reason I call the A minor sus chord A minor sus later, is for context. If in that position, in this progression, in this key, that weren't an E minor sus chord, it will be a regular E minor chord rather than an E major chord. So I think, so if you like, the E minor sus is kind of a development of the underlying chord, the E minor chord. So I think it's important personally to say E sus or E minor sus and distinguish the two, just to give whoever's reading your progression underlying context about what's going on. Lots of people hate me for saying that, but I think because it's giving context, because it's giving information, it's useful, so I do it. Okay, let's keep going. Lots more broken chords here. Just again, something else you can do in the left hand there, a little bit of scale going on. Up the broken chord and down a little bit of scale. Again, you know, yet another reason to practice the scales, it just kind of falls under your finger. Let's just watch that again. we go. There's that D to E again, the cheesy C chord, more suspensions. Every now and then, note that I'm not too bothered about just stopping, okay? There. But then follow up with some movement. There's that scale again in the left. I liked it so much I did it twice. The other thing I'm doing is thinking musically I'm creating variety. Note that I just went a little bit higher just there, just to create a little bit of sense of variety. And as I did, I gave it a little tiny bit of a dynamic swell out. I got a little bit louder. Very faintly. Now getting stronger and growing and back down again. Again, I say it time and time again, but yeah, getting the notes right is important. Getting a good sound from your chords and whatever is important. But just as, if not more important, is being musical, getting the expression, getting the dynamics right, stuff like that. So if you find yourself really focusing on, oh, can I press this note, can I press that note, just step back and listen to the sound you're making. Is it musical? That is so important. Let's keep going. Another set of contrasts. Contrasts are really important in music. Noticed how I had a bit of complexity. I was getting a little bit loud, a little bit more complex, so I brought it back to something more simple there. Let's just listen to that bit again. Oh, here we go. Pushing the boat out but then getting simple. Nice and quiet and expressive. And that's our ending. Yeah. I decided to end the progression on A minor sus because it kind of matches that feeling that D Dorian has of just being kind of on the edge of something, kind of hanging. And I could have resolved back to a D minor, but it wouldn't have been quite as satisfying. I think ending on that kind of question mark, if you like, much more suits this kind of modal sound. Yeah, and you'll find that if you start playing around with modes, you'll find that the kind of emotional dynamics, the way the sound works, is rather different from the major and the minor. And often you get these kind of uncomfortable sounds or these edgy sounds, or as in the case of D Dorian, this sense of just kind of sitting on the edge of your chair just a little bit, waiting to drop off but never quite doing so, okay? And for me, that A minor sus at the end just kind of reinforces that. But I'm careful to finish on the A and the D at the top there. Something you will find when you're playing around with this progression for yourself, as I hope you will, is that the voicings and inversions you use in your chords really make a difference. Yeah, I won't dig into that point too much, but sit down and play around with your different voicings and inversions and you will see what I mean. Some of them will drag you back fatally easily to C or A minor. Yeah, the other the two regular all white note keys. But if you choose your voicings and inversions carefully, choose the way you play your chords carefully, then you can create this very kind of delicate, interesting Dorian sound. Okay, so there we go. I hope you have fun with that one. Just to save you the job of jotting down the chords from the screen, I've actually put them in a PDF file which you can download using the link underneath this tutorial. Okay, so take that to the piano, see how you get on with it, and give me a shout if you have any questions or comments or feedback. If you want to film yourself playing through it, that would be absolutely amazing. Please do share the link with us all, because I'd love to see it certainly, and I'm sure other people would as well. So that's it. I've got more tutorials kind of in the planning stage. I have just eased off on the tutorials a little bit recently because as I said, I'm working on several other projects, one of which is a new book project, several details of which hopefully I'll share soon, because I'm going to be asking you guys a few questions. I'm going to be trying to gather some ideas and some feedback as I work on that. But as I say, we'll mention that again soon. As usual, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please just hit the red subscribe button in the bottom right hand corner of the video screen. I've got loads of these improvisation exercise videos and loads more on music theory, on jazz, on blues, on improving your classical playing, all kinds of different things. Follow me on Facebook, on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are below. Please check out my Patreon crowdfunding campaign, patreon.com/BillHilton, and do please check out my books, especially How to Really Play the Piano, the stuff your teacher never taught you, which covers this whole business of treating the piano as an improvisational instrument, and also 7 Studies in Pop Piano, which deals with this particular style that we're playing here, you know, this kind of ballad style, this pop piano style. Lots of people have found those books quite useful, and I'm sure that you will as well. Okay, there we go. As I say, enjoy that improvisation, and I will see you again very soon. Take it easy.